This is Nicole Van Tassel with I Explore Science, creator of I Explore Academy. That's our professional development program for teachers who are revising their curriculum and their classroom instruction to promote exploration and discovery and meet the 3 dimensions of the NGSS. So today we are going to talk a little bit about how you can make your assessments more engaging and also 3-dimensional. So this is actually one of the trainings that we did in I Explore Academy. So I'm just going to take one small piece of it because I'm not going to keep you here for like 45 minutes. But I want to share, so the 3 approaches that we talked about in I Explore Academy are the performance task model, instructionally embedded model, and project-based learning model. So these are 3 ways that you can assess your students on NGSS standards, so in 3-dimensional ways. These assessments are not going to use your standard multiple choice, true, false, short answer, matching. We want to move away from all of those like content fact-based questions and move toward 3-dimensional assessments where students are actually engaging in a science and engineering practice to demonstrate, sorry you're hearing screaming, to demonstrate the science and to demonstrate their knowledge of the disciplinary core ideas. And then oftentimes we bring those cross-cutting concepts in as a way to understand a phenomena. So the core of all of these assessments, students are explaining or manipulating or doing something with a phenomena. So that's a key part in all of these assessment models. And then students are using those 3 dimensions, bringing in the science and engineering practices, using the disciplinary core ideas to explain that phenomena or to understand that phenomena by explaining the phenomena or modeling it or doing whatever with it. They are showing you they understand the content, the disciplinary core ideas, and then again, the cross-cutting concepts are typically like the lens through which they are viewing that phenomena and making sense of it. A couple things I want to emphasize. I emphasize to my Explore Academy members. I want to emphasize it to you. Don't try everything at once. Don't, in your first unit, don't do every single performance task. Even as you update one unit after another, don't just do the one performance task, then run project-based learning, then one instructionally embedded. Like, get the hang of one style first and then move on to the next. I mean, I guess I don't want to say don't do that, but don't feel like you need to do that. If you want to, sure, go for it. If it's not going to overwhelm you, why not explore new things? But don't feel that you need to do all of these things at once. Because there's no reason to overwhelm yourself. It's okay to take baby steps and to try one thing at a time. I guess I don't want to ever say don't do something. We should always push ourselves, but let's not also overwhelm ourselves. One thing that I do want to say is please stay true to your objectives. Make sure you have identified your assessment objectives. You know exactly what you want to see your students do. You know exactly what you want your students to know, because you need that information when you're crafting your assessment, and you don't want to lose track of those objectives just to make it fun. While we want to make these assessments engaging, and that's what I want to talk to you about, we also need to stay true to those objectives. And then again, the whole point of this is incorporating your 3 dimensions. So always focus on your science and engineering practices and your cross-cutting concepts. I personally always start with the science and engineering practices as the foundation for the task. And then I incorporate the cross-cutting concepts in with like the questioning and the framing. So if I am incorporating like modeling as part of my task is modeling, so that's my science and engineering practice, I would then incorporate the cross-cutting concepts of like systems and system models into that by really emphasizing I want my elements of the model to identify the boundaries of the system, or identify maybe if I'm doing energy and matter, how energy and matter is moving through the system, or whatever it is. And again, so much of that depends on your content, so I can't tell you what specifically to do, but I bring the cross-cutting concepts in after I've identified the science and engineering practice that my students are going to engage in. And a lot of that comes from the actual standard, because there's one that's tied to the standard. That said, I often bring in additional science and engineering practices, elements of them, that support it. So like, let's say modeling is my core standard. I might also bring in some elements of analyzing data that supports their model into that task. Okay, so in the full training, that was much longer. I talked about all three of those approaches. But today I'm just going to talk about the performance task because that's really the easiest one to implement. It's definitely going to be the easiest one to implement like on short notice because it's not something that you have to design before you've designed your unit. I mean, ideally it is because we should always have our assessment in mind before we've designed our unit. But that said, if you've taught your unit and you're like, oh shoot, I didn't design an assessment, you can't really go back and do an instructionally embedded assessment. You can't really go back and do a project-based learning assessment. You kind of have to do a performance-based assessment. So while you should always think of your assessment before you start your storyline and before you start your unit, you should have it in mind. You should know what you're assessing and what your ultimate outcomes are. In terms of crafting your actual task, it's okay if you didn't get it done right at the beginning. You can still create a three-dimensional task and put it at the end. So this is also something that you can definitely do in online instruction or in a typical classroom. So really quickly, a performance task is basically any learning activity or assessment that asks students to perform to demonstrate their knowledge, understanding, or proficiency. So they're performing something, and what they're performing is a science and engineering practice. It also yields a tangible product or performance to serve as evidence of the learning. So again, their performance is, did they develop a model or use a model? Did they analyze and interpret the data? Did they construct an argument from evidence? So that's part of it. And then the tangible product could also be the model that they created, the food web that was the model they created, or the graph of the data they analyzed and the description of the data, or the predictions they made as a result of their interpretation of the graph, or the argument that they constructed as a result of analyzing the evidence or whatever it is. So it is the performance and the actual like thing that they did. It's not a bunch of multiple choice questions that they answered true or false, or multiple choice questions they answered true or false. It's not a bunch of multiple choice questions or true or false questions that they earned points for. Okay, so that's what the difference here is. So in a performance task, my Body Invaders assessment is an example of a performance task. Basically, students are asked to, first of all, to it's heavy on writing and modeling here. So students are first asked to examine organisms like viruses, bacteria, and protozoa. They look at these different pictures. They can see like what, size. They can kind of compare sizes by looking at how magnified the microscope had to be. And obviously that's not like super quantitative, but they get an idea. And then they had to collect evidence to support use this as evidence to support why viruses are not considered living things. So this ties to everything they've learned through this unit. It's not like all this information is just given in this assessment. No, they've been learning that through the entire unit. But a lot of this was assessed earlier. It was the standards for MSLS 1-1 were fully assessed earlier in the unit, because actually in my full unit, it's broken into at least two separate instructional sequences. However, I wanted to bring that earlier sequence and tie it into like my big anchor. So I have two sequences and they kind of cycle the information. So they see it again. So it's bringing it back in. So I'm bringing back that earlier information. They're tying it to the anchor and they are, again, looking at cells again. So then the cells are modeling how viruses enter eukaryotic organisms, and then they're illustrating and describing how the organelles that are relevant to this phenomenon, so they're going to be talking about like the nucleus and the cell membrane, are affected by like viruses. So again, we're hitting on those same standards that they learned before on cells and cell organelles and cell structure and all of that in light of my larger unit phenomenon. And the science practice that students are engaging in is this like arguing from evidence and developing a model. The modeling is important in that they're not just drawing a picture of a cell and labeling organelles. They are specifically explaining how viruses are invading the cell and the cell organelles that are relevant to that phenomenon. And again, they've learned this throughout the whole unit as they've learned about like all of these components and what the cell membrane, what the different components do, and how viruses interact with the body and all of those things. But anyway, then they go on and they participate in a group project where they are actually okay, well, actually, sorry. Then they are given some information about the immune system and the nervous system. They have to tie it to how, so they're taking information from different sources, they're synthesizing it, they're tying it to how the body works together as a system to like defend the body from disease. And ironically, this was developed like last January, not this past January, a full year ago. So it has nothing to do with coronavirus, but it's relevant now. But all of that was independent work. However, now they're going to take all of that work and they're going to create something much more tangible and much more fun and engaging. So it's giving a little bit of like reason why you got to do all this hard kind of stuff. And they are going to do this in the group format, and they're creating a press conference. So at the press conference, they have to basically assuage the fears of the nation about about this pandemic that is moving across the globe. And they have to explain to people how their body is designed to fight this disease and how the disease could affect their body in terms of how the virus invades their body, how their body is going to respond to that virus, or how it is set up to fight that disease. There's elements of immunity and things like that are included in the assessment. And then they engage in a like Q&A style, so they get to kind of challenge each other and kind of interact with each other in that way, and it makes it a little bit of more engaging and just more fun and interactive in that sense as well. So the press conference becomes a little bit of a, I don't know, like a debate or on your feet kind of thing as well. So I just wanted to give you a summary of the assessment so we could kind of highlight how you can make these kind of performance tasks a little bit more engaging. Okay, so the first part is you want to pick an engaging scenario. So a deadly virus taking over the planet, obviously engaging. Right now, it's probably a little bit scary. When, again, I wrote this, it was not yes, it was a potential thing that could happen. It was not our everyday experience, so it was a little bit less engaging. However, if your students can handle it, it's a real life thing that's happening now, and it's real. And honestly, even when I was, and it was distant, so it wasn't, when I was teaching 5th and 6th grade, my students, it was during the Ebola outbreak, and my students were very interested in the Ebola outbreak. Obviously, it was not happening anywhere near us, so it was a very distant kind of interest and thing in that. But that said, even though it was a scary topic, they were interested and fascinated with it. So it's something to keep in mind. You know your students, but either way, my point is just find an engaging scenario. So a deadly virus taking over the planet, it's engaging, right? Establishing a colony on Mars. I have a good friend who created her first unit in biology is all about like establishing a colony on Mars. That is an absolutely engaging topic, and it's actually like relevant, and it's, who knows, it's possible. Like, it's not just total science fiction. So cool. Explaining why your potted plant died is a little bit more on the boring side. It is a phenomenon, but it's kind of boring. And I will make a total confession. I have used that phenomenon as on an assessment. So I'm not saying that every single phenomenon you use in your classroom or on an assessment needs to be amazing. But if you want to spice up your assessment and kind of make it cool, like try to find something that's super fascinating, right? Okay, you also want to have a written or a documented component. This is really important, especially for the next part, the peer element part, because you need to assess your students. You need to know what your individual student knows. You need to see their performance and see what they produced and what they created. So have that individual written documented component. But then don't be afraid to add a peer element. So maybe it is like I did here with, they took that information that they had collected independently and that they had not collected, but they had analyzed and came up with independently, and that I was going to be grading. And they worked then together to come to a consensus and create this press conference. So then the press conference was more like a demonstration of their collaborative knowledge, but I still had all of that independent work to fall back on. On the other hand, you could do something like a peer element could be create, I've done things where like doing concept maps where, okay, now other students come in and then you add to others' concept maps and you just do it in different colors so people can see who wrote different things. But adding just some other way for students to work in social groups can turn a more boring performance task into something more engaging. That's kind of all I got. It's really important that you're choosing an engaging phenomenon for your performance task. Again, that really makes a difference because students want to actually explain like what's happening there. Other like ideas for phenomena, I mean, well, there's like a bazillion ideas for phenomenon, but some other ones that I've done are like kind of mysteries or like what happened to, I don't know, there's, I haven't done this one, but I remember seeing it and thinking that was the cool, like weirdest thing ever, and I wanted to know more when all of those weird antelope things just died in the, I don't know, in Russia or something a few years ago. That's a weird thing. That could be an engaging phenomenon. Obviously, it just isn't tied to your unit, but just weird things like that, weird phenomena, engaging phenomena, tie those to your unit. Include that written documented component. That's not really for the engaging part. That's just more for your own assessment part. But that allows you to include a peer element without losing the assessment factor. I'm not going to dive into the instructionally embedded and project-based learning components because they don't want to take up too much of your time, and that was like a really long training that we did. But those are other ways that you can assess your students in three-dimensional ways that are, again, engaging and fun to do. There are some posts on the blog about those, though, that you can, and I'm going to jot down, so I'll post those links below. Blog links that you can check out. You can check those out and learn a little bit more about instructionally embedded assessment tasks and project-based learning assessment tasks for the NGSS. And you can kind of get a taste of those as well. Anyway, if you would like to continue learning with us, please check out our Kickstart AHA Intro to the NGSS mini course. It's 4 days, 4 short workshops, less than 10 minutes, delivered right to your inbox. It's a really good like overview. It gives you a good framework of what the NGSS looks like in the actual classroom. So we don't dive into like, this is the science and engineering practices and these are the 8 of them or 7 or whatever they are. And this is this one and this is that one. And it's not like that. It's more like, this is what your classroom will look like when you start using the NGSS. So it kind of gives you just a good feel for what it actually looks like in practice. That is my goal with that, at least. And it's totally free. It's delivered right to your inbox. And if you like go through day 1 and you hate it, just unsubscribe. But you also get some bonus resources, so you might as well stick around for the 4 days, snag the resources, and check out some of the videos. And then, you know, NGSS your classroom. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you have any questions, just post them below. Otherwise, I will catch you later. Have a good one, guys.